Okay, so I guess maybe we'll get started now. This is a tutorial. I'm not sure how to pronounce this. QA2AQ.
Perfect.
Being Agile at Quality, the Values, Practices, and Patterns. And it's led by Joseph Yoder and Rebecca Werfsbrock. And Rebecca Werfsbrock is from Werfsbrock Associates. And I know Rebecca from her presentations and her work with Agile Open Northwest and also the Agile Alliance. And I know she's also a longtime Agile advocate, author, and conference speaker. And I met Joe just through reviewing his presentation before the conference a couple of months ago. And he's the founder and principal of the Refactory. And he's also a co-author of the book, A Scrum Book, The Spirit of the Game. And both of the speakers are into identifying and using software patterns. And maybe you could call this out, Joe. You're well-known as the author of the Big Ball of Mud pattern, which I don't know about. So I'm going to let you guys start the talk now, and maybe I'll toss that to you too, if you want.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Moss, and definitely thanks to PNSQC for inviting us to participate with this. And we're going to be presenting we're going to have a little bit of interactive stuff on being agile about qualities, values, practices, and patterns. This is being done with a lot of work from Rebecca and I. And so we welcome the opportunity and are grateful to be able to participate. And just to kick it off is, I've known Rebecca for a long, long time. I originally met Rebecca. It means we're a little bit older, but back in the 90s. and was real grateful to be able to get to know Rebecca. And as you can see from this picture, that we've actually been collaborating on some of these ideas for quite some time. And we've been doing a lot of collaboration for at least 15 years or more, even though I've actually interacted with Rebecca before that from the original Object OOPSLA days and things like that. And Rebecca, as was said, is the president of Werfsbrock Associates. Her first engineering job was in quality assurance a long time ago. And she's definitely a design geek. She's author of 2 well-known object design books and the inventor of the first DD. Before there was TDD or DDD or BDD, there was responsibility-driven design. And I remember when I kind of first started getting to know and meet Rebecca, she was all about going good design and advocate of the CRC cards and other low-tech design tools. And she's been involved with writing a lot of different things. She's a columnist for the IEEE, and she's an Agile enthusiast. She was involved with the experience reports, just really document and share knowledge from people out there really doing it on the Agile conference, the main Agile conference. And since the first Agile conference, she's been involved with that. And she's also, as was pointed out, we're from the Hillside Group, another not-for-profit, as well as like the Agile Open Northwest. And it's really into sharing knowledge too, patterns, proven practices and stuff. So she's a pattern enthusiast, the Hillside board treasurer currently. She's been out there and she likes to run marathons too. That's one thing I like about Rebecca as well. But anyway, just a little bit about who we are so you know what influences us and where we're coming from.
Yeah, so I'm not currently running marathons, Joe, but I am still running, and I hope to go jogging and take a break after sometime in this conference. We have to pick our times in the Northwest when it's not raining this time of year and when it warms up enough so that we don't freeze. Yeah, I just want to say a little bit about Joe Yoder. I've known him for a long time. For those of you who may not know what the Refactory is, you've certainly probably heard about the term refactoring. And refactoring is something that, Martin Fowler wrote a book about, that people in the Refactory wrote the first tools, actually in Smalltalk, to do some refactoring and are very good at doing those sorts of things. But anyway, the other thing to know about Joe is he likes to travel. And so COVID has been rough on him, but he has gone to pattern conferences. He's the president of the Hillside board, but he is, I guess I would say, our ambassador around the world for patterns conferences. And so Joe goes regularly to South America and Asian block, and participated in Scrum Club, where they wrote up patterns in their book. Joe also consults and does very good things with people in South America, Brazil in particular. So he likes to travel. And so, he's virtually here with us today in Portland. So welcome, Joe.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca.
So what we'd like you to do, you heard a little bit about us. It would be good if we could get a little bit of information about you. And this is, we're not going to use this for marketing purposes, but if
your name's not in it, so don't
your
worry
name's
about
not in it, but we kind of want to know what people's current role is and what their interests are. So we'll take, if you click on this link, you go to a Google form. Joe, you might show them the form.
Okay, I'll definitely do that.
And we'll spend some time
so
filling it.
just to take a few minutes so we're just asking a few questions. It takes very, very short amount of time.
But
if people could do that, we would appreciate if a couple people could jump in, mostly so we understand where you're coming from. Is this supposed to be tutorial? And we will interact a little bit. We'll have we're presenting a lot, but we will also have some interaction. So give us a little bit about your
tell us about yourself and what your challenges about quality in its intersection with Agile.
Yes. So if people could just take a few minutes to start off, a little bit of slack time to kind of focus.
So you might show the questions part.
Oh, there we're starting to get some people.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. What show the questions?
Here's the questions. What's your role? What do you consider to be your area of expertise, industry you work in, and how long you've been practicing Agile, and what do you like to get from this tutorial and stuff. So we have like 3 responses so far, Rebecca. Oh, okay. Lots of quality assurance, some tester, well, cool. Developer, engineer, okay, manager.
No product owners yet.
Yep, no Agile coaches or product owners. What domain? Insurance. Oh, couple in insurance and medical. I've worked in medical quite a bit, and healthcare as well. I like healthcare. Okay. Your core area, manual testing, generalist. Okay, software testing. Oh, lots of years of experience of Agile. Good. How to use it.
So if they have lots of experience, they might be teaching this tutorial as well as us. Yeah.
Yes. And then we some tips, tools you can use. And we're hoping to have some of that. I mean, some of our patterns and practices or some proven techniques that we've experienced as well as people we've talked to has done as well. Time breaking into appropriate size, misunderstanding of Agile. Oh, yes. That's always a big one. Communication with product owners. Yeah.
But do we yet have a product owner that's filled out the survey? No. Nope. Okay. Don't have time or automation.
One of the challenges is that I like this one is quality is probably considered the least important, and that can become, and that can affect your ability to be Agile later on too. Because if you all of a sudden you're having to deal with quality issues, and you're no longer you have problems, and then you can't be as flexible as you were before. Large scale projects and migration projects, lack of organization, team commitment to quality. Yes, for sure. So we have quite a variance, but most people, one person is not experienced at practicing Agile, but a lot of people have been practicing Agile for quite some time. Quite a few different areas of industry.
Real estate, yeah.
Yes.
Do we still, Joe, you're scrolling up and down. Do we still?
Yeah, because I noticed you were saying real estate, so I could scroll back down there. So
yeah.
Let me go back up here. Nope, no product owners.
So someone said they're a trainer and coach. Okay. So okay. Yeah.
Okay. Nice. So we do have that. Okay.
So, okay, I think we're
Okay.
going to move
So
along.
continue, go ahead and
Yeah.
continue filling that out, those of you still working in it, but just to kind of go on, here we go.
Yeah, so let's talk about what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about agility and quality and a little bit about patterns and the relationship to practices. And then over a period of several years, we wrote patterns that have been published, and we want to take a quick tour through the patterns, and then we're going to have a wrap up and ask, quest Q&A kind of. Hopefully we have time for doing that. But hopefully what we can do today is give you some, I won't say defenses or things. If you deal with your challenges, maybe this will inspire you to try some certain things out in your organizations. We also want to hear from you and understand, I'm going to say, what practices you found to be effective, particularly those who have been in experiences and maybe have more tricks that we could learn about from each other.
Yes. So, and by the way, since both Rebecca and I are involved with this, we have the benefit of one of us being able to watch the chat when the other one's talking. And so if there's ever anything you want to put up, you can bring it up, and we can have that dialogue intermediate, because this is more of a tutorial, and it can be as interactive as what we're able to make it as we go.
Yeah, we'll do our best.
And our real goal is to definitely leave you with some techniques, some practices. We call them some patterns as well that you can take back with you. But we're also open to hear about some other techniques that obviously a lot of you have a lot of experiences as well. And something that I always like to think about when we're going to be talking about Agile and quality here. And one of the things is, in my past life too, I was actually involved with QA and manufacturing before I went out and decided to go into the software field. And when I really involved with the software, and we were looking at what makes quality software, and that came from the group that invented, as Rebecca pointed out, before Martin even wrote a book, we invented the term refactoring, and it was trying to make design better, refactoring to a better design, and testing was key about that. I thought it was tragic that when I started working in industry a lot, especially throughout the 90s, that QA, quality assurance, was often seen more as, it was more just like the gatekeepers, quality control, and they were it had a lot of the problems that people put on our little survey there, but when Agile came out, it was never talked about not to do quality. It was really focused on this, individuals and interactions over processes and tools. It doesn't mean that you don't have them. It's just that you value that. And working software was also valuable over comprehensive documentation. Not that they were against documentation. And, we have collaboration and responding to change. You can have a plan, but we know that things will change. And as the manifesto said, is that while there's value in the items on the right, they value items on the left more. And an important principle in most Agile practices is that people work together to produce a high quality product. And it shouldn't be just people testing that care about quality. Everybody on the team needs to care about quality. And it's important to build quality in. We've even heard it with, it was almost like a couple of the keynotes was preaching to the choir when they were talking to Rebecca and me, because these are things that we have been pushing in the Agile. In fact, we were kind of miffed, and that's what kind of led to some of our work. In like the late 2000s and the early 2010s, we were noticing that a lot of times Agile seems to get caught up with blinders on and sometimes misses that. So we want to focus on that. And one thing that Agile definitely does a good job is most Agile teams do a very good job on focusing on functional requirements. It's not that they only focus on functional requirements, but usually if you're a Scrum team or whatever type of practices you're doing with that, whether you have Kanban or even when you're doing some lean type practices, and if they have product owners or product managers, depending on how your organization is formed, and I've consulted with a lot of different ones out there, and then even had teams of my own developers doing a lot of this for different organizations, is there is a high focus on functional requirements. But a lot of times the focus on non-functional requirements gets put off for a while. And as we know, if you don't focus on these important system qualities at appropriate times, they can really cause problems later on. And in fact, it can even influence how agile or how flexible you can be. And quality was a pillar of agile development. And a lot of qualities we look at, some people call them like non-functional requirements or quality attributes, constraints, quality of service requirements. And there's always the classic ones we think about, such as performance, security, reliability, for example. But there are certain qualities that really influence how we can evolve our system and can even influence our development philosophy. And I even believe that these types of qualities get overlooked the most, like maintainability, evolvability, or testability. I heard one of the speakers talking earlier that it was important to design for test. And that's a pattern I have written before with some other people, is having the ability, if you don't kind of design your system to test, it can be hard to add that in later. So you even thinking about that influences how you develop the system. So there's some qualities that are very important, and they really help with being agile and can influence our development velocity as well as our adaptability to change. And so something that Rebecca and I are going to be talking about, and this is a theme all the way through. There you see when Rebecca was running marathons, and you see me with dancing. But I'm with Mary Lynn Manns, which is one of the co-authors on the Fearless Change Patterns when you're trying to make changes in your organization. And so what we value is important. So not only me as an individual, but teams I work on and organizations I work on with, they have different values. And so, and Agile was supposedly, if you have the Agile mindset, like Linda Rising talks about, it's important to focus on what are your values, and understanding and articulating your values is an important part of being Agile. And so depending on what I value, if I value dancing, like Mary Lynn values dancing, and she teaches, she became a licensed Zumba instructor, and she still, even during the pandemic, has a couple of times a week where she does, and I've joined it before, where she'll do Zumba, where it's a Zumba on Zoom kind of thing, which she does, but that's because she values it. And so if you value quality, and if we value building quality software and wanting to make sure that we're not only meeting the customer requirements, but that includes the qualities that can influence us later, we need to think about that. So we're going to talk about some of these practices with that.
Yeah, so in some sense, quality is an important value, and understanding and articulating your values are an important part of being agile. But we kind of want to turn to talking about patterns, in that patterns are things that we see in the world that have been, I'm going to say, proven in a certain context over and over again. They aren't just applied like a recipe where you exactly follow the steps. And so, we took the time to write some patterns, but what's the difference between, I'm going to say, Joe, move ahead. What makes any sort of practice successful for you is something to think about, because when we look at, and you'll see us talk about our patterns that we have, in that if I have a practice that I can apply in my organization, it means that I can own it. It means I don't just take it out of a book or out of a manual or out of a style guide and just it just plunks right in there. It can fit into my context, and it fits the way that we work in our organization, and that is something that requires us to be active about it. So you can try it out. You can learn and improve it. In fact, one of the things that that sort of gets missed in the way that people talk about patterns and practices is they say, "Oh, are you doing XP?" As if doing XP were one thing. I remember an experience report years ago from a guy who worked for Carfax, who said, "If I'm doing XP the same way I was a year ago, I'm not doing XP." So, when we introduce you to our patterns and any sort of practice that you have, try it, learn, improve it, and it's adaptable to your context. So we're not going to have the little guy move around anymore, but, talking about what makes a practice into a pattern. And you see these little icons that we're going to be using here. The practice is a little guy moving around, but he's now fixed. He won't move anymore. And a pattern is something that's been crystallized and condensed into a description that usually includes 3 main elements. There's lots of different pattern forms. What situations can I use this pattern? So what's the context? And you as a pattern applier have to kind of say, is my context similar to what these people who crystallized and wrote about this knowledge? Oh, okay, maybe it fits. And then what does it trying to solve? What questions does applying a particular pattern? And then what usually works? And it isn't just slam dunk, I try this pattern and life is better. Life is not like that. So there are always consequences and trade-offs of applying a pattern. So values drives practices, and a practice becomes a pattern when someone has pickled it, has condensed it, they've found it to be repeatable, it's useful. It has some positive consequences. If it had negative consequences, it would be sort of an anti-pattern. I'm not going to go there. It may also have consequences that you have to be aware that not everything that I try is a good thing. So in some sense, I've been listening to talks with people over the conference days where they're sort of saying, well, Agile, Agile is what you do and what you own. So I think, mitigating some of the negative consequences is on us. Yeah.
And I always like to, being a pattern person for a long time, is patterns can be thought of like good or proven practices, or proven solutions, or proven practices to repeating situations or repeating problems. And it's embodying a lot of knowledge and experience of what works versus what doesn't work. So Moss pointed out early on, I'm probably best known for the big ball of mud patterns. We wrote those a long time ago, more than 20 years ago, but there's still today, you hear people, even Eric Evans in his DDD book talked about big ball of mud from that. And it was never an anti-pattern, though some people think that. We talked about the most successful architectures deployed to date are big balls of mud, spaghetti. Why? What causes that? And maybe if we understand it, and there's some good reasons, and we even talked about some mitigation things with that. So trying to capture, keep it working and other things which fit into the Agile mindset. But there are some things that you can do if you understand you're going to have a little bit of messiness, just as you write software, for example.
So Don asked the question, and I think I can quickly answer it, is what's an anti-pattern? So it's something you picked up and tried, and with the best intentions, and it didn't turn out the way you expected. All right. So it had more negative consequences than positive consequences. And in order, usually if someone's documented an anti-pattern, they say, well, I started out with these good intentions, let's say, like in putting quality all the way to the left. And here's what some negative consequences. But an anti-pattern doesn't just stop there. It says, well, here's why. And maybe here's some mitigation that you can do to get out of it. A good anti-pattern would also tell you how you can, and some are harder to get out of than others.
Right. So yeah, people think of it as good stuff. And so there's actually a link to the book. Actually, I was one of the reviewers, and I was part of the software architecture group that we reviewed on that book, the anti-pattern book. So thanks for putting that out there, by the way, Moss. So we're going to talk about some patterns about becoming agile at quality. It's kind of, we had this cute acronym that we coined that Moss got right on, which was QA2AQ. So a lot of times people think quality assurance, and Agile goes, and the QA team is like, well, where do we fit into this Agile organization? And we have a lot of experience. In fact, even working with Rebecca before on the experience reports with a lot of organizations, as their organizations became more Agile, how they were able to evolve, how the QA evolved. And so we coined it as agile quality and building quality in throughout. So it's not an act. We just, we're going to act. It's a habit. It's getting into these repeated practices like Rebecca talked about with this.
So we have some information for you that gives you, we wrote patterns papers, and essentially they've been published, but we also wrote another form of the pattern, and I'm going to say, where did it go? I'm trying to see. I wanted to put the link in there. So there's like pattern papers, but if you go to that, there we go. Thank you. I tried to type it into my chat and it didn't go in there, so I'm kind of worried. But anyway, we have both copies of all of these patterns papers at that site, as well as what we will call gists that we'll tell you about in a minute. You can see that we started writing them in 2014, and over a period of a couple of years, we're quite productive at churning out patterns that we had seen. Now, patterns are things that you don't just invent, but you see in practice. And so that's just something to be aware of. It's like things that actually work for folks.
Right. So, proven practices. It's not, what you're inventing is the writing of it and the sharing of the knowledge.
Yeah.
It's not, we're seeing that these work with this.
Okay.
And by the way, if you go to that link, you're going to see a lot of the papers, as Rebecca says.
Okay. So I just wanted to tell you kind of what, if you go look there, what the difference between a pattern versus a pattern just is that in these papers, each, and this happens to be the system quality specialist, is in each paper, each pattern is given a roughly 2 pages of description that describes the current context, some of the challenges that go on, the forces that happen, and then examples of how it's applied. So that's if you see on the left of the slide here, that's kind of what you'll find when you look at that. I took and turned them into gists in a shorter form, sort of condensing the information. And we also have a link to in that bit.ly, Agile quality, you can also find the gist. So this is something that if I were trying to give the high level elevator pitch to someone else on my team about what the pattern is, what would I do? I would have this shorter version. It doesn't have so many examples. It just says, it sort of states the problem, asks the question, and it gives you a high level summary of that. The reason why I make the distinction between full pattern descriptions and just is, attention and time span. So if you are wanting to learn more about a pattern, you might go in and read the full pattern description and really get into it. If you want to keep it as a memento, the gist is kind of helpful. And there's even another form of the pattern that's like a single sentence summary. And some people call those patlets. So it's not one of my favorite names because it's hard to say, but you can have different levels of detail. So just be aware of that. And in our tutorial today, we're going to show you the gists. Don't intend you to read them. You'll get the material there. And read every last pattern in detail, but that's what we're going to present you as the gists and talk about them today of some of the patterns.
So we've collaborated. This is mostly work by Rebecca and me, though we have collaborated with Hironori Washizaki and Adamar Aguiar. Hiro is from he's in Tokyo, Japan, and Adamar is from Porto, Portugal. So we have done a little bit of work with these, and we have a lot of patterns, and we broke our patterns down into our categorization, though you can categorize them in various ways. And we're not going to cover all of the patterns. We don't have time because we have about 24 of them. So in our tutorial today, we're going to cover a subset to give you a feel of them, but and we'll even get some feedback on you of which ones you may have some experience on as well. And the core ones is really you need to, part of it is tearing down the walls, breaking down the barriers, and integrating quality into your Agile teams throughout. So that's important core. But we also have these three other categories, which is becoming Agile at quality, we call it, which you'll see a lot of these like whole team, quality focused sprint, automation, et cetera, pair with a quality advocate. But also identifying qualities. So we need to identify what are important qualities, how do we find and fit into the Agile mindset. So how can we mix Agile with actually finding and describing our qualities and making them part of the roadmap and getting them on there? And then it's also important to making things visible to the team and the whole organization of what's going on, because you can't fix what you can't see. So it's important to have that. So the ones that we used yellow, bold, and then in case people have trouble seeing the yellow or bold, we also added asterisks to it. So these are the ones that we will be presenting today with this, okay? So let's start down with the patterns for being Agile at quality, the core patterns, which are breaking down barriers and integrating quality. And so breaking down, so this is what Rebecca was calling, sometimes in the patterns community here, people call patlets. So if you ever hear the term patlets, this is what they mean, but it's really like a pattern summary, which we have in some of our papers, especially in our last paper, you'll see a pattern summary of all of them, which break down barriers, for example, says tear down the barriers between QA and the rest of the development team. Work towards engaging everybody in the quality process. And it gets into this, you know, it's not an us and them, it's all of us. We are doing this together. And then you incorporate QA quality practices into your process all through, which includes making sure product owners or architects, developers, everybody, designers, the DevOps people, it's all for, it's integrating that quality practices all throughout the whole process as you're going through. And so breaking down barriers, and really what this one is, a lot of times enterprise has boundaries between groups. You know, how do you overcome these boundaries or these walls? You're like, oh, sometimes the QA team is put over here and, oh, we're not supposed to talk to them because we might influence them or they might influence us or whatever. But, you know, how can Agile teams remove these barriers and become more Agile at quality? And, you know, and it isn't just QA who needs to care about quality. QA can really help the rest of the team even understand quality. And we have some experience from where that actually has happened before with some very good experience reports with that. And you can really help make quality an integral part of the whole streamlined process. So we tear down the walls through various actions, which it means including QA early on. They might even be part of the planning and the roadmap, working with the product owners and the management team and others, and make them part of the sprints. So when you say, for example, if you're doing Scrum and you're on a 1 to 2 week sprint and you're getting into your heartbeat of your Agile, have quality part of these daily stand-ups, or at least during the weekly, you know, the beginning of sprint planning meeting, so that teams understand what are the important qualities. And so, embed them into the teams as well. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Yeah. So Melody asked the question: shouldn't they influence each other? Each role has a different perspective, and bringing in their perspective to quality. And I agree with that. Breaking down barriers, and we'll talk about whole team as another pattern. But breaking down barriers allows people to feel part of a team that is not just their role.
Right. And so, yes.
And they do have unique perspectives.
Yes, they do have, I mean, that's valuable. And in fact, there's one experience report where from the Agile experience reports, and I'll put a link in later for you to look at. In fact, I could maybe even include the paper in the bit.ly if you want, but it talks about where one organization definitely kind of embedded in how they helped each other with doing that because of that different perspective. Now, another one is integrating quality. So enterprise usually has different boundaries between groups. When do we do certain kind of testing? When do we test about certain types of quality? And so with integrating quality, you want to integrate quality into your whole process. And here you can see this is some typical, whatever people look at, some Agile process. And
the S word, yes.
Yes. it's kind of Scrum-like, but I'm not promoting Scrum because I think any Agile process is going to have some iterations, inspect and adapt, improve, learn, and focus on what adds value, making sure to make corrections as we go. But part of that is early on, you're going to have some product envisioning or roadmap, and it's important to look at what are architectural risks. What's the most responsible moment to look at them? Are there important quality scenarios or landing zone criteria? And then, so that might include some quality related items on the backlog that can lead to some quality related tasks. And as we're doing functional acceptance testing, we also need to include certain amount of quality testing as we go. And we figure out when the more appropriate time is doing that. So this is really focusing on how we can incorporate important qualities in your process and figuring out where QA fits in. And QA fits into different pieces. And being Agile, we don't over design or get stuck with analysis paralysis. On the other hand, some architectural qualities, if we know security is important because we're doing medical or financial, when should we address that? And what are certain tasks? And sometimes those are even, as I'm working on a functional user story, I might need to think about certain qualities for the definition of done or ready for the next task. But and a lot of times, some of these qualities are cross-cutting, so they'll go across many user stories as we go through here.
So that's just a high-level overview of those core kind of patterns that sort of have that overarching theme, if you will, that kind of pervades the rest of the patterns. And that I want to talk about just a few of the patterns that are related to becoming Agile or becoming more Agile at quality. And one of the things you might look at some of these patterns like, oh, Agile says I shouldn't have a quality focused sprint. If I'm doing Agile right, and I'm just picking this one out to kind of make a point, I shouldn't just do one where I'm bug fixing or tuning performance because, damn it, that means pardon my French, that I'm not doing Agile right. And I'm going, no, this is a practice that people might use that we have found in the real world, and it actually does improve things. So I'm just saying, don't, all of these, and maybe you have certain patterns that work in your context. Again, patterns work in a context that apply to your situation that you might choose, and others that don't. So anyway, let's talk about these 4 patterns that we're going to. So when you talk about Agile teams, this is a picture of a team that I work with in Korea. It's great to have stickies against a window because it's a lot of light coming in. But if I think about Agile teams, they're typically cross-functional. There's good communication. Their focus is on stakeholder needs. They incrementally deliver software, adapt to change, collaborative. But the whole team is working together. And if I think about Agile teams, oftentimes the issue is, well, where does QA fit in? In some sense, if we're part of the team, and I'm going to say we are part of the team, quality assurance is part of the team's responsibility. How do quality assurance teams fit in? Many QA groups that I have seen work independently from the software team, and they're usually involved later in the process than I think is appropriate, with not a whole lot of communication with the rest of the team. So in some sense, they're but if I'm thinking about a whole team, another trend that I've seen is that like QA is busy, trying to satisfy quality concerns, and they're I'm going to say sometimes they're the lone voice in the room, but in actual fact, the whole team pattern is really that says architects, who affect system qualities. At QA, work closely with product teams, that the whole team works at understanding, defining, delivering, and verifying system qualities. And that's really quite different than QA as a scarce resource and architects fighting with developers about, oh, you should take this broader view of things. So both QA and architects, when you have this whole team approach, have a very important, this pattern have a very important role. Architects are often, in Agile world, are sort of pushed aside just as QA is like, well, what do we do with QA? They're stewards for ongoing sustainable development, whether there's a role or a title, that's someone who's working that way. And QA has this, I'm going to say, mission, passion for quality as being a focus point. And a whole team is one where you better incorporate QA into the team. You better incorporate those who really have concerns about quality.
And an important principle that as you're being agile at quality is originally we called this pattern automate first. And we renamed it because sometimes some things, it's hard to automate first, but it's important to automate as you go. I really love this quote from Bill Gates, where he talks about the first rule of any technology used in a business is that automation applied to an efficient operation will magnify the efficiency. But there's the other side, which is automation applied to an inefficient operation will also really magnify the problems that you have with that as well. And so with this pattern is automate as soon as you can, and automation is key. And I've heard a few people talk about that through the talks over the last couple of days if you put off automation too long, and say, for example, for building some of your test automation and you built your system, well, now the system could be hard to automate the test. Whereas if you've started automating, it may even influence how the system development is going to go to make it easier to automate. And also it's hard to refactor or evolve back to a system to do that. So therefore, what you want to do is create an environment and use tools to automate fundamental things that add value as soon as you can and as soon as you succeed to add values. So don't put off these tasks until way late in the development. And so there might be things, for example, repetitive tasks or tedious things, and anything that involves a lot of waiting and you're going to repeat it. If it's error prone, obviously you want to try to minimize that. And if we can automate that. Some quality metrics, performance, reliability, security, code smell detection, and making that visible. Architectural conformance. Maybe we go through a persistence layer because we want to make sure there's no SQL injection or no ways of passwords being shared openly in the code. So we want to enforce it. At least everybody that's accessing the database goes through a database layer that does certain checks and make sure that we have the right security we want, or things that take a lot of time. And there's some things that are less frequent but important. Some things can be hard to automate, but we automate what we can, when we can, as soon as we can is what's key here with this. So
I guess, Joe, it's automate at responsible moments.
Yes. The most responsible moments. So something that Rebecca and I's complained a lot about is a lot of times Agile myths, people say put off like quality till the last responsible moment. Unfortunately, sometimes that gets misunderstood to the last possible moment. And even though you could still maybe release it, it can cause it can start tearing up the architecture where it causes it very muddy, and trying to refactor and add important security requirements and important performance type of requirements way late in the game can have a tendency to really tear a system up. So there might have been a more responsible moment we could do that. And then there's a shadow the quality expert. So we want to spread and share the knowledge. So how can organizations grow quality expertise and spread knowledge throughout this? So what you do is you have, maybe your organization doesn't have enough QA. That happens in many organizations that I participate in.
These days, yeah.
Yeah, they're understaffed. They're just in frantic last minute trying to do what it takes to get the system out. So therefore, maybe have various people follow, or I'm shadowing you. I'm learning from you while we're doing the task. So I'm following the QA expert, and the expert works as a kind of a mentor teaching me, and I'm learning different things that I can involved in. I can even help with a task. And in fact, with some of this is it can even influence the mindset of the development teams, and where we've seen where there was an overlap of what was being tested by people doing TDD and unit tests from the developers versus what QA does to that. And so, for example, here's the paper I was talking about, which you can also Google and find off the Agile Alliance experience report, was tearing down the walls. It's a great experience report about pairing with a quality advocate, where Stephanie here, she shared about when their organization became Agile, QA had to figure out where to fit in, and they really flattened out and spread all across the organization.
Yeah, they blew up the separate department and embedded them. And one might say, "Oh my goodness, that's a horrible thing. How do we do what? How do we deal with that?" And in actual fact, as a scarce resource, she found ways to pair and build expertise. One of the things, Joe, I wanted to say about the previous pattern is that oftentimes, if it's a very deep technical skills required, like being a performance engineer, being someone who's a reliability engineer, someone who is a security specialist, both at the development side and at the quality assurance, and I think those skills work hand in hand. Those people in particular are those that get spread very, very thin. And when I'm doing this pattern, applying this pattern, because we are spread thin, is that you have to realize that if I'm shadowing the quality expert and they aren't very good at communicating, they aren't very good at letting someone who's junior try stuff out as they guide them, then building their expertise won't happen. So
right.
It's not just that we want to follow in their shadow, but the pattern in depth talks more about those aspects and qualities. And if you're in a time crunch, it may be very hard to let someone else, have the keyboard. I'm just saying that to bug Joe.
Thank you for adding that in, Rebecca. And one of the things too here is sometimes your organization can't even necessarily keep full time that certain quality expertise, but you bring in like a security expert at certain points, and then if you bring in the right person, they're able to also share some of that knowledge, but they have to be open for doing some of that as well. And then here, one thing I wanted to add too here with what Stephanie had here is an important point, I think, and something she shared with me. I was actually the shepherd on her paper that when she was doing it, which means I gave her feedback as she was writing the experience report. Rebecca had gotten me to be a shepherd on this one. And there is a link on there, which we can share with you later. We'll copy out of the slides and put in there. But one thing that she told me is that she found interesting when they flattened and went in here. Stephanie told me that she found that 60% of her tests was the exact same thing that developers were testing for. So now, rather than waste her time of duplicating, she was able to spend better quality time by embedding in the teams, helping them do a better job with that 60% of the tests. And then she was able to that gave her more time. This is getting into the Agile mindset, spend more quality time that reduced redundancy and waste. She could make sure they had better tests on that 60%, and she was able to focus on that 40% that they didn't test a lot more. So that's just a very good outcome of one of the outcomes that she had there. And thank you for sharing that, Moss. Appreciate that.
Okay. We're doing a whirlwind tour here. So if you want to talk about some patterns for identifying qualities and kind of start at the beginning and then go along the way. Okay, so without any further ado, let's move on to talk about some of the patterns. I think there's a real challenge that some of these patterns are trying to get at is that I want to find and describe the qualities of the system that I'd like to have while still being agile about it. And people have expectations for, and I've heard talks that, well, there's less documentation now. But we want to talk about some ways of describing them and making them there for people. So system qualities at the very beginning of any sort of product or project, I think are important to understand. And if we don't understand what's essential, then we're just going to muddle our way through until we get to where we think it's good enough. And that rework and refactoring mindset, we can just refactor to get things good with the qualities we want, is sometimes difficult. So rather than just enumerating lots and lots of qualities that we want, having a focus early on to identify what's essential, and to not oversimplify them can really, it's like creating a backbone for the rest of the quality work that follows. So just to give you an example of, this is a story from Michael Keeling and his work when he was at IBM, and they were installing editions of my IBM search engine at various clients. Is that he talked about, and we've used it in other contexts and seen it too, is an Agile quality attribute workshop, where you take this practice of just taking, in busy people's time, an hour or two to create an initial essential quality scenarios for a release, for a major shift, for a customization, or when you want to plan for specific quality goals, and to write, to essentially have this spider chart where it basically says, okay, the people in the room, tell me what you think there are the most important qualities for this upcoming release or this, and give them a dot voting kind of, this is the practice of dot voting capability. And then we write up scenarios. Maybe the details are filled out after the meeting, but we agree upon, these are the essential ones. So who might attend that meeting? Could be a product owner. Again, we get to talk to the product owner. It could be key business stakeholders. It could be architects. It could be QA folks, and tech leads if they know about some of the qualities that need to get there. The point is that this is a practice that supports finding essential qualities. So there can be other practices that you might do to get the essential qualities. It could be a risk analysis that you do. But anyway, just wanted to talk about this as a practice that can work to get people to write essential qualities. Another thing is to have quality scenarios in an Agile format, not, I'm going to say, this SEI talks about qualities, and there's a lot of process around that, but how do I write an Agile quality scenario is to have a high-level view and to talk about, just like user stories, I'm talking about, here's what I want. In this case, this one is about performance. And let's talk about transactions per minute, under what conditions. Okay, so quality scenarios that you specifically write. And when I say you, based on your context, who writes those? Product owners, quality engineers, quality assurance, tech people who say, well, we need to consider this quality. I tend to believe that the three amigos kind of meetings, or the product owner only does this sort of stuff, isn't the way to get qualities working. However, I have seen cases where if your company is focused on certain qualities, or your product is, they're good product owners that can do this, but usually it's not alone. So
just as an example to illustrate what this template that was adapted from the SEI that Rebecca was pointing out here you can think of performance that was the users initiate 1,000 order transactions per minute under the busy part of the day. And transactions, so during that, transactions are processed with an average latency of 2 seconds. So maybe this is your scenario that you feel giving whatever busy part of the day means for your organization, which can change according to that. And so using this lightweight methodology and teams, and it's important to have everybody involved, as Rebecca just pointed out. You can say, well, let's think of how that, so here's users is going to be the stimulus in this case. And what are they doing? They initiate some kind of order. And this can even help you derive and write some of your quality tests for this. And so what are they initiate? What it is? In this case, it's a system. It could be a lot of different things.
If you said it's microservices, whatever.
Right. Yeah, it could be, you could even have a batch process going on or whatever. And so the environment is a fully load during the busiest part of our order processing day. So maybe it's during lunchtime, we figure when everybody's taking breaks or ordering from Amazon or whatever that may be. And then the response is, well, we want to make sure that the transactions are processed properly and the orders are placed. And we want to measure over a lot of these transactions at the average latency. So some might be 3, some might be 1.5 or whatever, but we want the average to be within 2 seconds of this. So this is even starting to kind of derive some tests on this. And for example, we have a lot of other possible values that we've done when we've been involved with some of our different people in industry, our clients we've worked with. But with the performance scenario values, you can think the source could be an external system, maybe something triggers an event from one of your clients or components or databases or whatever. The stimulus could be either periodic events or random events, or maybe even some combination. The artifact could be whatever it is that we're working on at the time, whether it could be something on the database or the system microservices out there or whatever resources. And then the environment is like, is it normal or are we in emergency mode? So if we're in emergency mode, can we still process orders, or do we give a nice warning message or whatever it is? Or are we overloaded or a partial operation? And then what is the response that we want? What is the proper response? But what's very important too is the final thing on there is what we call the response measure. The time, this is something that you can use to derive even some of your quality tests on that. And then just as one more quick example, I'll just put it up here. It's like you could think of like security. It's going to obviously have different types of stimuluses and the artifact and the response. Here you have like a known authorized user. So it looks like Joe Yoder transferred money to Rebecca's account. And then later on, we see that the user was identified as an embezzler. They had somehow hacked my account. And then, so we want to make sure that we can still restore funds to my account. So somehow somebody hacked in and transferred money to their account, but we find out that it was a hacker. And
so one of the things about these kind of scenarios is that oftentimes people think, oh, I'm writing user stories, I'm trying to describe functionality. What are the, whatever aspects that I also want to have product owners or people in the rest of the team be aware of? And like, for example, the security scenario involves systems of systems. So
right.
Not only do we have to recognize the quality that we want to achieve, but we have some time constraints on it too. Like we need to have other processes that we trigger to correct, restore, reverse a transaction and do other kind of processing. So it isn't just that our scenarios are about testing unit tests or integration tests. They're testing overall larger system qualities as well. And some of these are very hard for people to write on the backlog unless you write a scenario like this.
Right. I mean, a lot of these qualities are cross-cutting. They'll cut across many user stories through there, or
epics.
Yeah. And in fact, some of these scenarios, these high-level scenarios, can lead to influencing a lot of functional user stories, but also you might end up with a quality user story. That's one of our patterns too. Or things like that. So this is one way to kind of identify at a high level, and then there's some other tasks you can do after.
Okay, so talking about system qualities, one of my biggest bugaboos has been when people write user stories or an acceptance criteria and there's nothing about quality to that story. And, it's just supposed to happen. So as a quality geek, if you will, if I, taking this simple example is like folding out the initial acceptance to say what qualities in this story, system qualities, do we want to ask about and make sure. So for example, even in this simple example of I'm placing an order with a credit card, can I cancel it? When during the transaction? How fast do I get confirmations? How is information transmitted? Is the credit information retrained? Do I have control over this? All kinds of things. I could go on and on and on. Sometimes it's performance things that I go on and on about. And I had a product owner once tell me that they did not like to specify these things on acceptance criteria. And I said, why not? They said, well, I'm not sure when they should be done. And I go, well, then the team doesn't know when they're done. So all I do is write another story with, increase the performance by whatever, or add this little tiny thing. And as a developer, that would drive me nuts. I understand incrementally delivering value, but what is the qualities that we want to have when we deliver this value is a question to ask. So I really like, I might write another story, but let's get down what we need to do, because development teams don't like to write toy programs either.
And developers really want to understand what the definition of done and what are the qualities. And so this is one way is you can attach them right to your functional story. Other ways were, like we were saying, quality related stories as well.
So another thing I wanted to talk about for those of you who may or may not know about landing zones, they were invented by Tom Gilb. People at Intel use them a lot. They essentially are a range of criteria. Rather than saying something achieves this one value, you have a zone. So what is minimal? We can live with that particular quality measure. What's the target? What's realistic? Great if everything goes well. That's not a stretch goal, but it's something you really think you could achieve. And so you have a zone for system qualities that you're trying to do it. If you're building a big system, it might be at major subsystems or components or sets of microservices. If you're having a small system, you might have quality targets for a release. Don't have dozens and dozens of them, but having those that you're able to monitor and measure. So what makes a landing zone an agile landing zone is that you recalibrate those values based on deployment, understanding of what you can do, and making architectural or quality trade-offs. Because sometimes things that we thought we could achieve, we find out that, we can't unless we spend a lot of money or if we do this other things. So an agile landing zone is one that you expect to recalibrate as you deploy and learn.
Okay, so thank you, Rebecca. So our last category for patterns for being agile at quality is focusing on, you can't fix what you can't see, is what Rebecca and I like to say, and what we've really promoted in our being agile at quality. So it's important to make qualities visible and think of things that add value to the team with that. So, we're talking about some core practices such as integrating and stuff, and then, whole team and other types of practices, but also finding, so you can't make visible what you don't know, what are the important ones. And so that's where we went through. Rebecca talked a lot about finding the essential qualities, but then we want to focus a little bit on these for making things visible. So how could we improve what we can't see with this? And visibility is key. And in fact, Alistair Coburn has often talked about, as you're being agile, having these radiators. And Rebecca and I have kind of evolved that to have with these radiators is what we call the quality radiators. It's focusing on that. And in fact, these information things that can include things such as dashboards to test and validate qualities. And sometimes they can be physical things, but other times they can be you can think of something that you're capturing data and making visible digitally to a team. And this pattern was so important that in the Scrum book that I was part of writing here just a couple of years ago with Sutherland, Copeland, and there was a lot of other of us involved with this, which we did a lot of work. When you're really practicing at least Scrum, and at the core of it is the essence of Agile, we have 96 patterns in 2 pattern languages that focus on how to focus on value. Value is important, and the organization stuff, but having information radiators was important. So in our reality, especially nowadays online, we need a lot of electronic or digital type radiators, but focusing on these different types of quality things and making them visible to the teams can be are important. And an example of physical artifacts that we saw a lot of, which you can still take those physical artifacts that used to be pre-pandemic have become digital even, are things like even the backlog. And so one of our patterns is we talk about qualifying the backlog. And so with this one, it's important for Agile teams to know if there's it could even be a quality user story, and it could even be addressing certain types of quality, such as we have some technical debt or security issues and things that we need to do. And so, yes, you can add backlog items for quality related architectural work. Yes, you can, for sure. And it can be done in a lot of several ways with this. So this is the pattern idea.
Yeah, one of the practices that supports this pattern, for those of you who may not know about the work of Philippe Cruchten, he was one of the key things about the rational method, but he talks about coloring your backlog. And so oftentimes what you see on the backlog, and one way to color it is to put tags or characteristics and modify your templates to do this. But there are things that contribute to positively that are visible, like a feature or a defect that you're fixing. If the defect stays there, you don't. But he's saying these invisible things that affect quality should also be on the backlog. So those things that detract or contribute to, so if removing technical debt has negative value, or an invisible architecture feature that enables certain performance characteristics, all of these things, he says, make it visible. And if you make it visible as this practice, sometimes what happens is there's always consequences to applying this pattern. Product owners may not prioritize them. That's good, because then you'll say, well, see, it didn't happen because you didn't allocate time to make this quality happen.
And another, just a couple other patterns we'll throw in here before we kind of wrap up is another qualify the roadmap. Also, while you're doing the planning, you can also do this. Now, our NDAs will not let us show our client roadmap, but you can think of, you have different risk things. And in this example, you might think of, okay, we're going to be doing Android and iOS. Maybe we're going to be moving to microservices, and we're going to be adding security in for here. So where should we plan? What's the most responsible moment when we should start thinking? And sometimes on the roadmap, you might be balancing different alternatives and thinking of which ones what's going to be the best idea. And so you might do some experiments ahead of time here in April or whatever that you're going to actually bring in July or August, for example.
So quality related work is on the backlog. Yeah.
Yes, you can.
So another thing that I like to point out as a pattern is quality checklists. Checklists are things that people who use them should create, but I can have quality related checklists. This is just an example from someone that was involved in our writing workshop that shared with us. But if I have release criteria, and this is a case for apps, not microservices happening every day, but is like a checklist of qualities that were important to make sure before the deployment was there. You notice there's a little set of lines down there at the bottom that says, oh, there's some exceptions or notes here. So it's not always that everything passes through and, with quality, but, at a release, at sprint planning, at having checklists along the way so that we know what we're doing. So we've given you a whirlwind tour of patterns for being agile at quality. There are more of them that we could talk about, but we want to kind of move on to say that these patterns have been proven in practice. They aren't just inventions, but we'd like to take some time to make sure that you might, have you take a look at the patterns, I'm going to say, and have you applied any of these in your work? Have you done, so I'm going, why is not, okay. My carriage return is, something is not working. Joe.
I'll put it in here, Rebecca.
Yeah.
So people, I think that one should be good enough. Hopefully they can get to that one.
Yeah. So this is a chance for people to, read through the patterns, see if there's anything that you've applied. Maybe you've done some other patterns.
Yeah, it's really just a fast checklist. If people could go in and kind of go
Tick
through
off those that you might have used.
Yeah, out of some of these, and we try to put a little bit of description and a short description on all of these patterns. And if there's any others that you think that maybe you've used that's outside of
practices that you think are really important for quality that
you
we
can go
might
ahead
not
and
have touched on, it'd be great to share. And then we'll have some discussion here.
So let's take a few minutes for that before we wrap up.
So this is meant to be a sort of a tick box. You can tick off more than one if you've done certain things. None, I haven't. That one is a mutually exclusive, but I didn't code up the form that way. But sort of get a sense of what people might have done.
So hopefully everybody's able to get to this link. Did you try the link?
Yeah, we should be playing music here.
Okay.
So yeah, one of the things I wanted to mention about patterns and documenting patterns is patterns are living things, and so initial documentation of patterns is something that gets refined over time. So when you read our papers, you might see that we changed the terminology. In fact, slightly from paper to paper. In fact, categorization was something that only after you write a bunch of them does it make sense to organize them in certain ways. And we had people at a workshop once suggest different organizations for patterns, and they came up with like half a dozen different ways of categorizing them, which is great. Yeah, we're starting to get some answers.
We're starting to get some good responses. For example, a good test plan is in alignment, has supported product and engineering, or some other practices, have the whole team submit quality reports, being vocal when the engineering team is drafting. Yeah, that could be a pattern, a practice, I guess. How to be vocal, when to be vocal, tactful ways of sharing that, which might fit into even some fearless change patterns.
So whole team quality reports, that's an interesting idea. It isn't just the QA report.
Yeah. So as people continue to answer that, let's just kind of go ahead and wrap up here.
Yeah.
Talk a little about this, Rebecca.
Yeah. We'd like you to continue filling out that form while we're talking out if you're doing it, because I like quality reports. Dawn brings the point. quality reports instead of defect reports. That's actually a very, very interesting idea, because we're trying to make qualities visible and quality visible. And defect reports tend to have like, okay, what qualities do we have? And so, one of the things about dashboards and radiators and things like that is like we're measuring, ongoing measurement. Because once you get a system quality, it doesn't stay there without attention. So we've written a number of patterns, another number of other patterns. They were more along the realm of architecture patterns and things to keep track of stuff while you were architecting in an agile environment. Things like defining architectural spikes, where you actually go and, in the XP practices, they have a technical practice that says a design spike where you go and experiment. Well, you can have architectural spikes too, or that you have triggers where certain system qualities either degrade below a level that you consider that I need to have research into or not, and it has a discussion. It's a point of discussion for a meeting. Talking about technical debt management, even about planning for responsible moments where you're going to revisit your assumptions that you might have had. So just want to say that there's a lot more patterns about making sure that system qualities and quality are in than what we've presented here.
Yep.
Others have written about them as well. This is about... there's the link there to, you can receive,
Right.
You can download from there.
So something that I like to say is, if you're going to do quality, so we want to kind of wrap up and save a couple minutes for transition and questions and stuff. Pause points helps. So really, I intentionally paused a little bit there because sometimes we need slack time to really improve. If you really want quality, you don't overbook time. And you have to use slack time to either reduce waste and focus on qualities with this. So if we want to get quality and ways to get slack time, you need to monitor, make things visible. And sometimes I've even known teams to inject time into their process. For example, there was one team that every day before they did their daily stand-ups, they had certain qualities or issues from yesterday. Do we have some technical debt? Maybe we can start off. It's almost like doing your stretches before you run. And I was really impressed by this team and sometimes you can even think of maybe you have every other week where the whole team has like a coding dojo, and we look and we do some experiments can we get rid of some debt or address certain qualities with that. And this isn't just Rebecca and I kind of saying this. There's some famous people that talk about slack time. For example, this book by Tom DeMarco, Slack, Getting Past Burnout, Busy Work, and the Myth of Total Efficiency. And the main most important things you'll learn from this, if on this book, is that there's innovation requires slack and quality requires slack. Full should never be the goal, and that's one of the problems that sometimes when people have their agile blinders on and they're not in the agile mindset. It's about value, not about just how fast are we going. So full should never be the goal. If you have a string stretched all the way out, it'll break. So you want to be able to experiment and learn, and nothing can increase somebody's think rate. Overtime is actually a dangerous thing, and it's important to have some slack time. Sometimes just the slack time is let's just go for a walk, and then all of a sudden, then the solution comes to you.
So yeah, there's time. Another inspiration that I highly recommend you think about is thinking fast and slow. The fast thinking is what we do when we're reacting and not consciously working on hard problems. Slow thinking, which is deliberate, and sometimes in the middle of writing a performance test, I don't want to be interrupted and I need to deliberate, and it tires me out. So I need to then take a break. So it's the case of the rhythms of our work as people who care about quality, that we need to be aware of the fact that sometimes slow thinking is hard work. Sometimes we need to protect it. We need to be aware that when sometimes we should be thinking slow, we leap into fast because it's easier, but it's not exactly the right thing to be doing. So yes, the comment was Slack is a quick read. The other one will take a while, but I'm a Kahneman fan.
Yeah.
The latest book I've read by him is and his co-authors is Noise.
And it's definitely an award-winning book. And the same thing here is velocity doesn't equal productivity. Velocity, just going fast, it should never be about just going fast. Sometimes the best thing to do is to do nothing, stop, reflect, and make sure we're going the right direction and focusing on value.
So with that, kind of leave you with one thought about what's next. If you're interested in looking at some patterns and where do you start? One of the things that I think about is that, I need to understand what my values are or what my organization's values are. I start with questions personally about knowing myself and understanding my values and how I want to influence my organization. And I actually believe we all can be influencers, regardless of role. And so understanding where my values are, what we want to do about quality, and then taking next steps.
Right. So it's important to focus on quality. That means you have to budget time for quality discussions, which some of our patterns have talked about, and quality testing. During the envisioning and requirements gathering, identify core qualities and engineer for quality and testing your architecture for quality. Maybe build that in as part of your architecture. And then even have these appropriate times that you can focus on when qualities can be delivered. The most responsible moments is what Rebecca and I talk about. And so that way you make it part of delivering system quality and paying attention as you go. And of course, there's lots of steps and patterns, and we put down some beginning patterns of where you can start.
Yeah. So yeah, what's essential? I tend to think that breaking down barriers and integrating quality is important with a whole team mentality, working out from what's essential. And Joe will say, and if you can't see it, and I can say, and if you can't test it, it doesn't exist.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you test it, make it visible so the whole team, it can influence the team's mindset. So just to conclude, and this is kind of in memory to a really good friend of ours, Mike Beadle, who was unfortunately a few years ago tragically murdered up in Chicago, but he was like the second adopter to Scrum behind Sutherland. And Mike Beadle was also the author of Enterprise Scrum, Business Agility, and he helped with the Agile Manifesto. He's one of the co-authors of this. In the first Scrum book, he was a co-author on. In the first Scrum pattern paper back in the 90s, he was also an author on. And Mike Beadle has this quote a couple days before he passed away. And I just love this quote from Mike, and I'm really sad that he's no longer with us. But he said, you can coach teams to be more engaged and collaborative, but no Agile framework, method, or mindset can save you from blatant failure if your development team is incompetent in basic engineering practices. Technical excellence is a must. So with Agile quality, architecture quality and Agile, it's important. People skills are important. Build good leaders. Have leadership principles and good practices, as what Rebecca and I. But we still have to value the technical side. And so what are your principles? What do you value with this? And
yes. So I wanted to say that we would like to, if people are interested, we have a Zoom meeting planned for noon on Thursday, this Thursday, noon Pacific time. If you'd like to come to that meeting and just chat about quality and your practices, it would be great. What you value, what kind of interesting things that you want to do. And I'm going to say I'm having trouble getting things into.
So this is your opportunity to have some time with me and Rebecca on your own, like during an informal coffee lunch, if you just want to chat with us. Are you pasting that in, Rebecca?
I said, Joe, I'm having trouble getting things into.
So I guess I'm going to paste that in.
Let's see.
With that.
Oh, nope, it didn't go in.
So, but just put a yes or no if you think that you would like to participate with this. I'll put the Zoom link information.
Yeah, if one person shows up and has a conversation with us, that would be great.
We'll definitely be there. I'm going to put it here so you can copy it. Also, too, is Rebecca put in there where you stay in touch. We'll definitely send out email the slides and other materials to anybody who wants. If you can go to this form that Rebecca had put in, that was put in there earlier, and I'll paste it in again, is this stay in touch form.
Yeah, we'll send you a copy of or a link to the copy of the slides.
Yeah.
Already did that one.
Yeah. Oh,
And,
beat me to it. Okay, good. I was putting it out there again, but anyway, that's really everything that we had for this. Thank you once again, and we want to definitely thank Moss for everything.
For the opportunity, yeah.
And by the way, that second quote is from our big ball of mud paper. If you think good architecture is expensive, try bad architecture. It's a lot more expensive, and you can't fix what you can't see. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Joe and Rebecca, for your presentation, and thanks for all the links and inspiration. And remember to also fill out the speaker survey for their talk and give them feedback. Either you can do it also through their Google Forms, but it's useful for PNSQC to know how you found the talk. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Keep in touch.